The fork in my hand paused midair, hovering over the slice of turkey I hadn't even touched yet. Brandon's voice had that sharp edge to it, the one that could cut you clean open in front of a crowd and leave you standing there, bleeding with a smile on your face. "Mom," he said, setting down his wineglass a little too loudly, "you know, we've all been talking. You really shouldn't try so hard with these big dinners anymore. You're not exactly quick in the kitchen these days. I mean, how long did it take you to get this turkey done? 3 hours." The words were light enough on the surface, but the smirk that followed, slow and deliberate, like he'd been saving it, made my cheeks burn. Laughter rippled down the table, polite from some, genuine from others. His wife gave that tight smile she always wore when he was being mean but pretending to joke. His oldest boy snorted under his breath. Brandon wasn't done. "You know," he went on, spearing another piece of meat, "if you ever just admitted you're not as capable as you used to be, we could all save ourselves the trouble. You could just show up, sit in a corner, and look nice for the pictures. We'd handle the rest." I forced a small smile because that's what you do when your own son decides to perform your embarrassment like it's dinner entertainment. The kind of smile that says, "I'll laugh now so I can cry later." My hands itched to push my chair back, to leave the table entirely, but I stayed put. I always stayed put. The room went quiet enough that you could hear the clink of a serving spoon against the sweet potatoes. Some eyes stayed locked on their plates. Others, like his sister-in-law, my cousin Ruth, met my gaze with a look that was almost pity, but she looked away quickly, and then, from 3 seats down, my granddaughter leaned slightly toward her phone. I thought she was scrolling at first, bored with the adult conversation. But then I caught the soft blue light against her face and realized she wasn't scrolling. She was on a video call. She didn't say a word to me, but she angled the screen just enough so I could see David's face, my ex-husband. He was sitting in his study, the shelves behind him lined with the same military plaques and medals he'd had when we were married. His jaw was set, and his eyes were narrowed. He'd heard everything. My granddaughter's voice was calm when she spoke, almost too calm. "Dad," she said, interrupting Brandon just as he started to pour himself another drink. "Grandpa's been listening the whole time. He heard every word you just said to Grandma." Brandon froze mid-pour, then laughed. "You're kidding," he said, shaking his head like it was all a big misunderstanding. But I saw the way his eyes flicked to the phone again and how the laugh didn't quite reach them. David's voice came through, steady and low, the same tone he used to use with young recruits, right before correcting them. "Stay there, Brandon. I'm coming over. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to the Still Got It channel. We're creating a community of amazing people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age." Now, back to the story. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the house was already warm from the oven. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted into the hallway, mixing with the scent of the ham that had been slow-roasting since dawn. My knees had been complaining since I climbed out of bed, but there was no way I was going to let them stop me. Holiday dinners didn't make themselves. I stood at the counter peeling potatoes. Each twist of the peeler sent a dull ache up my wrist. Outside, the frost clung to the edges of the lawn like lace. Inside, it was just me, the quiet hum of the fridge, and the low jazz station playing from the little radio on the shelf. The peace didn't last long. Brandon came in through the back door without so much as a good morning. He had one of those oversized coffee cups in his hand, the kind you get from those fancy cafes where they write your name in loopy letters on the lid. He didn't even take his coat off. "You remembered the Pinot Noir, right? The good one, not the cheap stuff." I kept my eyes on the potato in my hand. "Yes, it's on the counter." He glanced at the pies cooling by the window and made a face. "Store-bought crusts." "Yes," I said without looking up. "You couldn't roll them out yourself?" I put the peeler down for a moment and flexed my stiff fingers. "My hands don't work the way they used to, Brandon. It's fine." He shrugged like it was a minor disappointment, then reached for a piece of bread from the basket I'd set aside. "Sarah's going to want the rolls warm. Don't forget." He left the kitchen the same way he came in, without waiting for an answer. A minute later, I heard Lily's voice from the doorway. "He's in rare form today." I turned to see her leaning against the frame, her hair pulled up in that messy bun she always wore when she was helping me in the kitchen. She crossed the room and kissed my cheek. "You need me." I smiled despite myself. "Can you set the table? Use the tall glasses for water." Your grandpa always said the short ones feel stingy. That made her smile. You talked to him today. This morning. He's 2 towns over. Said to call if I needed more chairs. She gave me a long, quiet look. The kind where you know the other person's weighing their words before they speak. You know, you don't have to just take it, right? I knew exactly what she meant, but I turned back to the potatoes. It's just the way he is. She didn't answer, but the sound of her phone unlocking was sharp in the quiet kitchen. When people hear the word divorce, they picture shouting matches and slammed doors. That wasn't us. David and I didn't end with fireworks. We just faded. He was military through and through, married to the service long before I came along. Even when we were in the same house, there was a distance. You can't compete with deployments. With the kind of duty that eats up birthdays and anniversaries, like they're optional. By the time Brandon was 10, I'd already spent years raising him mostly alone. David would come home with gifts from his travels, his suitcase smelling faintly of jet fuel and the starch of his pressed uniforms, and Brandon's eyes would light up like a Christmas tree. When David left again, the light would go out. I was the one left to pick up the pieces. We didn't fight about it much because what's the point of fighting over something you can't change? One day, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, bills stacked in front of me, orders in front of him, and we both knew it was over. We signed the papers, hugged in the hallway, and promised to stay decent. We kept that promise. David still called on birthdays and holidays. He'd stop by when he could, mow my lawn without asking, fix the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom without making a fuss. But he wasn't there for the small things, the science fairs, the fevers at 2 a.m., the hard talks about grades and girlfriends. That was me. And maybe that's where the damage started. Brandon admired his father. The crisp uniform, the commanding voice, the way people straightened their backs when he walked into a room. But somewhere along the way, he decided I was the opposite. If David was steel, I was soft. Too soft, not important. It started with small things when he was a teenager, rolling his eyes at my advice, ignoring curfews, laughing when I got upset. As he got older, it turned sharper, sarcasm that cut a little deeper, jokes that weren't jokes, the kind of comments you learn to absorb because confronting them just makes you tired. Lily saw it. She's always been sharper than her age. I'd catch her watching the way he spoke to me, the way he spoke over me, and her little jaw would tighten. She loved her dad, but she wasn't blind. The irony, David never treated me that way, but Brandon took the version of his father he idolized, and left out all the parts that made the man respectable. By 4 o'clock, the house was buzzing with company. The front door kept opening and closing, letting in blasts of cold air and the smell of damp wool coats. Someone had propped the screen open with a heavy boot, and I could hear the scrape of shoes on the welcome mat as more guests came in. Brandon took it upon himself to play host. The kind of host who thinks pointing out every flaw is part of the act. Careful with that gravy boat, Mom, he said as I came out of the kitchen, cradling it in both hands. Last year we had lumps. We don't want to repeat that. I bit back the instinct to say something polite, just moved past him and set it on the table. The dining room looked good. I had to admit Lily had set out the nice tablecloth, the one I kept folded away for special occasions, and arranged the napkins into little peaks like she'd seen in a restaurant. The tall water glasses were in place, catching the light from the chandelier. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, waved a bottle of sparkling water. Do you have any that's room temp? The cold stuff makes me feel puffy. She didn't say thank you when I handed her the bottle. As I circled the table, Brandon trailed me like a shadow. Make sure you put the rolls out last so they stay warm, he said, and the mashed potatoes. Did you get the lumps out this time? I kept moving. They're fine. Fine for you, or fine for the guests. He shot back with a little laugh, like it was a private joke we were in on together. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lily's mouth tighten. She slipped her phone out of her pocket, tilted it in her palm, and tapped twice. I thought she was texting a friend, but later I'd learned those were the taps to call David. Brandon kept up the running commentary as people started taking their seats. Mom's famous rolls, he announced, setting the basket down. Famous because they're the only thing she never burns. A couple of cousins chuckled, though they didn't look at me when they did. I forced my lips into what I hoped was a convincing smile, but inside, my stomach was a knot. Years of these little cuts had taught me how to absorb them without showing the bruise. But tonight, Lily's eyes caught mine for half a second, and I saw something there. Not pity, not sympathy, resolve. She angled her phone slightly, propping it against her water glass. The screen lit her face in soft blue light. One more swipe, one more tap. Then she set it down like it was nothing at all. When I passed behind her with the cranberry sauce, I caught a glimpse of the screen. David's face, framed in his study. He was watching, silent, but his eyes were fixed like a hawk's. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, feeling the heat of the kitchen fade as the cold air of the dining room took over. Dinner had been going smoothly enough. If you ignored the little jabs Brandon had been slipping in all evening, I'd managed to tune them out, focusing on making sure everyone had enough gravy, that the sweet potatoes didn't get cold, that the rolls kept circulating around the table. By the time we were all seated, the plates were full, the glasses topped off, and for a moment, there was that warm hum of conversation I always hoped for. I let myself breathe just a little, and then Brandon decided it was showtime. He set his fork down with a clink and leaned back in his chair, stretching like he'd just finished a long day of important work. "You know, Mom," he began, loud enough to slice through every side conversation at the table. "I was telling the guys at the office about you the other day." The chatter died down. I didn't look up from cutting my turkey. He went on, "Told them how you've got this incredible skill, managing to fill your days without actually doing much of anything. Really impressive if you think about it. You've made a whole life out of keeping busy without actually achieving anything." I felt the muscles in my shoulders tighten. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sarah give a small, awkward smile to her wine glass. A couple of cousins laughed under their breath. Brandon wasn't finished. "I mean, you're great at this." He gestured at the table with his wine glass. "But let's be honest, you never really made a career for yourself. Never took a risk. Dad's checks kept things afloat after the divorce, and you just coasted. Some people build things, you just kept the lights on." The words landed like stones. I pressed my knife into the turkey just a little too hard, the blade scraping the plate. From somewhere down the table, someone cleared their throat. Another cousin shifted uncomfortably, but nobody said a word. Brandon leaned forward now, elbows on the table like he was wrapping up a grand performance. "It's just, don't you ever wish you'd done something real? Something you could be proud of besides this?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Lily's voice cut cleanly through the tension. "Grandpa's been on the call this whole time," she said. Her tone was as level as if she were reading a weather report. Brandon froze. "What?" She picked up her phone just enough for him to see the image of David on the screen. My ex-husband sitting in his study, eyes locked on the camera. "I've had him on video since before dinner," Lily said. "He heard every word you just said to Grandma." For a moment, Brandon looked almost amused. "You're joking." She didn't blink. "I'm not." David's voice came through the speaker then, deep and steady, the kind of tone that silences a room without raising in volume. "Brandon, stay where you are." The smirk on Brandon's face faltered. "Dad, I'm coming over," David said, cutting him off. "And when I get there, we're going to talk about the way you've been speaking to your mother." Brandon's laugh this time was high and awkward, aimed more at the rest of the table than at his father. "It's just teasing. Everyone knows I'm kidding, right?" No one answered. I sat very still, hands folded in my lap, watching my son try to make light of a situation that was getting heavier by the second. It was the first time in years that I felt the balance of power in the room shift. And it wasn't shifting in his favor. The air in the dining room had gone strange. Not loud, not silent, just suspended, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see which way this was going to break. Brandon cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. "Okay, everybody, relax," he said, looking from face to face. "It's just family ribbing. Mom knows I'm kidding. Mom, tell them." I kept my hands folded in my lap. "I'm tired," I said simply. "That's what I'll tell them." He frowned like he wasn't sure he'd heard me right. "Come on, don't be dramatic." He looked to Lily for backup. "Turn it off." She didn't move. "No." Brandon's voice sharpened. "This is family business, Lily." "Exactly," she said, meeting his eyes. "That's why he's coming." Sarah shifted in her seat, tucking her hair behind her ear, staring at her plate like it had suddenly become very interesting. Someone down the table coughed. My nephew leaned over to his girlfriend and whispered, "Do you think he's really?" Before getting shushed, Brandon tried another tack, the calm negotiator. Lily, sweetheart, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Grandpa doesn't need to. Her phone buzzed once, hard enough against the glass to make the water ripple. She glanced at it. He's close. Brandon's head snapped toward her. Close from where? 2 towns over, she said, her voice still maddeningly even. He left the moment you called Grandma a charity case. For a second, I thought Brandon might get up. He pushed his chair back an inch, the legs scraping the hardwood, then froze. He knew, we all knew. Walking out now would look worse. I stayed quiet, but my mind was running. I thought of all the years I'd let comments like this slide, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight, telling myself he didn't mean it, and here was Lily, refusing to let it go. I felt something I hadn't in a long time, not just relief, but the tiniest flicker of vindication. Brandon's foot started bouncing under the table, a restless little beat that made the silverware tremble. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "you don't want this. You don't want him in here making a scene." I looked at him for a long moment. "I want you to stop talking to me like I'm furniture." He blinked, taken aback, and for the first time all evening, he didn't have a quick comeback. The porch light clicked on, the motion sensor catching someone on the steps outside. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy, a pause, then one single knock on the door, not loud, but final. No one moved to answer it. We didn't have to. He would come in. The knock at the door had been enough to steal every sound in the room, but when the front door swung open without hesitation, a ripple of unease moved around the table. David stepped in like he'd been invited, though we all knew he hadn't needed an invitation. The cold night air clung to his wool coat, and with it came that faint scent of leather and something sharper, the way a room smells just before a storm. He didn't rush. He never did. His boots made solid, deliberate thuds on the hardwood, and each step seemed to land somewhere in Brandon's chest. David took off his gloves, slid them into his coat pocket, then hung the coat on the rack by the door with the same precision he'd use hanging a uniform. The dining room doorway framed him as he stepped in, his posture straight enough to make the old wooden chair legs creak in sympathy. His eyes swept the table once, taking in the plates, the frozen smiles, the way not one person reached for their fork now. "Evening," he said, his tone quiet but carrying to every corner. Brandon straightened in his chair, the tips of his ears already red. "Dad." David lifted one hand, palm out. "Just that," and Brandon's mouth clicked shut like a drawer pushed too hard. David's gaze landed on Lily. "You all right?" She gave a quick nod, chin high. "Yeah," for a heartbeat. His eyes softened when they met mine. It was just enough for me to remember the man who'd once steadied me through a winter storm overseas, one arm over my shoulders, saying nothing but keeping me upright. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder. He turned to Brandon. "And I need to talk about the way you treat your mother." Brandon gave a quick, breathy laugh, the kind meant to invite the room in on the joke. "It's just teasing, you know how families are." David didn't blink. "I know how respect works, and I know what it looks like when it's missing." From the far end of the table, my sister-in-law pressed her napkin into her lap a little too hard. My cousin's husband cleared his throat, then thought better of speaking. Sarah stared at her wineglass like the answer to escaping this moment might be in the reflection. David stepped closer to Brandon's chair, his shadow falling over the plate. 16 years old, he said, nodding toward Lily. "And she's the one who knows better. She's the one who stood up tonight when no one else had the backbone to." Brandon's eyes flicked to Lily, looking for a lifeline. She didn't look away. "I should have done this years ago," David continued, his voice still level, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "Should have been here to see it for myself. But I'm here now." Brandon shifted, ran a hand over the back of his neck. "Dad, this isn't the time." "This," David said, cutting him off, "is exactly the time. You embarrass your mother in her own home, in front of her family, and think it's just part of dinner conversation. That ends tonight." The silence after those words was thick. Somewhere, the furnace clicked on, and the faint hum of it filled the gap until David spoke again. "You're going to apologize. Not later, not in private, right now, and you're going to mean it." Brandon's lips parted, but David leaned in just enough for his voice to drop lower, sharper. "And when we're done here," he said, "we're going to have a separate conversation about exactly what changes from this moment forward. Because from where I stand, you've been living comfortably on the benefits of a family you don't respect. Holidays, hosted in your name but run by your mother. Favors called in without gratitude. Money you didn't earn. That stops tonight. You could see the words landing. Brandon's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He glanced around, maybe hoping to find even one person willing to bail him out. But the only eyes he met were watching, and not one looked sympathetic. David straightened, folding his hands behind his back, and waited. He didn't move for a moment. He just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on Brandon like he was inspecting a soldier who'd failed inspection. Not angry, not loud, just unshakably certain. That was always worse than yelling. "You want me to start?" David said evenly. "Or do you want to try apologizing first?" Brandon shifted in his seat. "Dad, you're blowing this way out of I'll start," David interrupted, his tone sharp enough to slice through Brandon's sentence. "Let's go back. 10 years ago your mother drove 3 hours in the middle of a snowstorm to bring you dinner when Sarah was in the hospital. You remember that?" Brandon blinked. "Yeah, but you remember what you said when she showed up. You told her she could have just sent money. That was the thanks she got for freezing her hands carrying those trays into your house." Across the table my cousin shifted in her seat, shaking her head slightly. David didn't wait for a reply. 5 years ago, she offered to watch your kids so you and Sarah could take that weekend in Maine. You remember? Yes, when you came back, instead of thanking her, you complained that she'd let them stay up late. That was your takeaway. Not that she'd given up her weekend for you. Not that she'd cooked for them, read to them, made sure they were happy. You criticized. Sarah's cheeks flushed, her eyes dropping to her plate. David took a slow step forward. 3 years ago, Christmas dinner, she gave you a set of tools you'd been talking about for months, and you said. David glanced at Lily. "Go ahead, tell me if I've got this wrong. What am I supposed to do with this? I don't have time for projects." Lily nodded once. "That's exactly what he said." Brandon looked at her, jaw tightening. "I was joking." David's hand came up, palm out. "You hide a lot of disrespect behind that word." There was a long pause. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. David's voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the steel in it. 2 years ago, he continued, she came to your house for your birthday. She brought a cake she made from scratch, even though her arthritis was acting up so badly she could barely grip the mixing spoon. You took one bite and said, "Too sweet." Then you went to get yourself a beer and left her sitting at the table alone. The weight of that memory landed hard. I saw it in Sarah's eyes, in the way Brandon's brother-in-law suddenly found something fascinating in his napkin. And last month, David said, you called her asking for $20,000 to expand your business. She hesitated, and you told her, "If you won't help me, don't bother acting like you're proud of me." That one made Brandon's head drop slightly. David stepped closer, his shadow falling across Brandon's plate. "Tonight, you embarrass her, in her own home in front of her family again, and you think this is just another dinner. No, this is the last time." Brandon finally broke the silence. "All right. Fine. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry, Mom." David didn't move. "That's not an apology. That's a reflex. Try again." Brandon's eyes darted toward me. "Mom, look at her," David said, his tone dropping lower, more firm. "Say exactly what you're sorry for. Spell it out so everyone here knows you understand it." The pause stretched long enough for me to feel my own heartbeat. Brandon swallowed. "I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you tonight and before. I'm sorry for making you feel like what you do isn't important." David waited. His silence pressed Brandon to keep going. "And for not showing respect, for making you feel small. You don't deserve that." David studied him for a long moment before nodding once. "Bada, but an apology without change is nothing. So, here's what changes." He glanced around the table, making sure every eye was on him. "First, you don't speak to your mother like that again, anywhere. If you do, I will ask you to leave whatever room you're in, and that will be the end of the evening for you. No second chances. Second, no more taking without thanks. The next 3 family gatherings are yours to run. Menu, shopping, cooking, clean up. Your mother is a guest. If she lifts a plate, you put it down. Third, the financial faucet is off. No loans, no cosigns, no introductions for opportunities. You want growth, earn it. Do it without her money, and without this family's shortcuts." David straightened, then addressed the room. "Not just Brandon. We're not pretending we didn't hear what we heard tonight. From now on, respect is not assumed. It's earned, day by day. Until you show it consistently, you're a guest here, not the center of gravity. His eyes returned to Brandon. You want to be treated like a man. Start acting like one. Brandon didn't answer. He looked down at his plate. Around him, chairs creaked. Forks were set gently onto china, and the room exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for years. Lily's eyes found mine, steady and bright, and for the first time in a long time, I ate without swallowing my pride along with my dinner. When the plates were finally cleared, nobody was in much of a hurry to leave the table, but no one wanted to be the first to speak either. It was like the dinner had grown its own strange gravity, keeping everyone pinned in place until they figured out how to stand again. Brendan pushed his chair back first, the legs scraping against the floor and a sound that made Sarah wince. He mumbled something about checking on the kids and left the dining room without looking at me. David, or Lily. Small conversations began to bubble up, cautious, quiet ones. My sister-in-law asked if anyone wanted coffee. My cousin offered to help with dishes. But before I could answer, David said, "She's not lifting a finger tonight." That ended that discussion. I stayed seated a while longer, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea. People drifted past me, some touching my shoulder briefly, some offering quick, soft words, "Good for you," "About time." A few simply met my eyes and nodded like there was no need to say it out loud. Lily stayed close, leaning against the back of my chair. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," she said quietly. "You didn't even have to yell." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the tea. "I didn't have to. I had you." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "He'll think twice next time." "He will," I said. And for the first time in years I believed it. When most of the guests had gone, the house settled into that soft, muffled quiet you only get after a long evening. David found me in the kitchen, standing near the sink with his hands in his pockets. "You should have called me sooner," he said. "I didn't think it would matter," I admitted. "He's been like this for years." He shook his head slowly. "It matters. It always matters." For a moment, we just stood there, the silence comfortable in a way I hadn't expected. Time had changed us both. But in that moment, I saw the man I'd once built a life with, the one who'd carried our son on his shoulders, the one who'd fixed the porch steps in the rain without being asked. "You were good tonight," I said. He gave a small shrug. "I wasn't here when it started. Least I could do was be here when it stopped." We didn't hug, didn't linger, but when he left, I noticed he gave Lily a small salute as he passed. She grinned all the way to the door, but next week at Sunday lunch with a smaller group, Brandon was quiet. Not sulking, not combative, just quiet. He served people before serving himself. He asked if I wanted more tea. It wasn't a transformation, not yet, but it was the kind of shift you notice when someone's testing out new ground under their feet. Word had spread, of course. Family members who hadn't been there knew. Neighbors seemed to know. Even at the grocery store, I caught someone giving me that knowing smile. It wasn't pity, it was respect. And Brandon knew it, too. He could feel the difference in how people looked at him, not with admiration, but with the memory of what they'd heard that night. He'd lost something you can't buy back, and we both knew it. That evening, as I settled into my favorite chair with a blanket and a book, Lily curled up on the couch across from me. "Do you think Grandpa will have to come back again?" she asked. Shook my head. "No, once was enough." She smiled, satisfied, and went back to scrolling on her phone. I thought about the years of quiet tolerance, the swallowed words, the dinners where my own son had made me feel like an unwanted guest in my own home. That night had changed something, not just in him, but in me. Brandon might still be my son, but he wasn't in charge of the room anymore, and that was enough. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe Brandon will truly change, or is he just behaving out of fear of his father? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine.